If someone is talking to you about the NHL draft, what's the first thing that pops to your head? Most people will answer this question by saying the rookie draft or the entry draft, where we get the new age of youngsters coming into the NHL. In some cases, people may think of the expansion draft whenever there's a new team coming into the league. But have you ever heard about the dispersal draft? The dispersal draft is a historical draft that has happened on a few occasions in NHL history, but it's super rare and it only occurs under special circumstances. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the NHL's forgotten draft structure, explaining its story of the most recent dispersal draft in NHL history, what kind of impact it had on the NHL, and how exactly it worked. The most recent dispersal draft happened in 1991 in conjunction with that year's expansion draft that commenced the large-scale expansion of the National Hockey League in the 1990s. The dispersal draft historically was recognized as a way of reassigning players at the NHL level to other NHL teams as a result of one team basically going under, whether they folded or if they were absorbed into another franchise or perhaps even through relocation. Now, this most recent draft essentially involves a little bit of historical context in order for it to make sense, so give me a second to explain all this. So in 1990, the NHL's Minnesota North Stars were dealing with dropping attendance numbers, and the team's owners, brothers George and Gordon Gund, proposed to relocate the team to San Francisco, but the NHL shot the idea down. The league was hoping to solve the situation in Minnesota while also reaping the benefits of a lucrative expansion fee in the San Francisco Bay Area. So they were hoping that they could maybe kill two birds with one stone here. So the NHL proposed a deal to the Gunn brothers, which would award the brothers with the newest NHL expansion team that would be based in the Bay Area. But in addition to this, they would have to sell the North Stars to an NHL approved buyer. In addition to the deal, the conditions of the sale would have to be that the new expansion team, which would become the San Jose Sharks, would be allowed to purposefully select players from the Minnesota North Stars organization in order to fill out a part of its roster. As compensation for any lost players, the North Stars would be allowed to take part in the expansion draft to replenish their roster of all the players that they lost. The Gunn brothers would pay $50 million to the NHL as the expansion fee for getting the San Jose Sharks, and they would sell the North Stars to a consortium group for $31.5 million. These are the rules of the dispersal draft. To basically summarize it, the North Stars were allowed to protect 14 skaters and 2 goalies who had played in at least 50 NHL games before the end of the 1989-1990 NHL season. From the unprotected North Stars players, but excluding the draft picks that were acquired in 1990, the Sharks would be allowed to select 14 skaters and 2 goalies from Minnesota. Up to 3 of the Sharks' selections could have been from unsigned North Stars draft choices, while another 3 could have been players that were signed between May 2nd and June 15th of 1990. Following the draft, the North Stars and the Sharks would then take turns in participating in the expansion draft, where they would each acquire 1 player from each franchise. The expansion draft rules are very similar to what we would have today. In this case, however, at the time there was only 20 other NHL teams. Essentially what happened was, for the other 20 teams in the NHL, they were allowed to protect 16 skaters and 2 goalies. The Sharks and North Stars would then have to take turns selecting from the pool of unprotected players until each of them had chosen 10 players in total. So as a result, in the expansion draft, 20 players would be selected, 1 from each franchise. To summarize it very quickly here, the Sharks would select 24 players from the Minnesota North Stars during the dispersal draft, and interestingly enough, only 4 of the players that were selected were actually from the NHL team. The rest of them either came from the IHL affiliate, the Kalamazoo Wings, or from basically the junior league levels like the WHL, the NCAA, and at least 1 player from the Soviet Union. Interestingly enough, most of these players didn't really amount to anything significant at the NHL level. The most valuable player actually that was selected in the dispersal draft was Arturas Urbe, who was a goalie from Latvia, who at the time was part of the Soviet Union, so that's how he was classified under draft rules, but he would later develop his own NHL career, while the rest of these guys basically became minor leaguers at best. When it comes to the expansion draft now, the biggest players were basically at the beginning of the draft, and it kind of fizzled out pretty quickly after that if you actually see the whole list. But the biggest players were Jeff Hackett, who was a goalie selected from the New York Islanders by the San Jose Sharks, Rob Ramich, who was selected by Minnesota from the Toronto Maple Leafs, Dave Babich, who was selected from Hartford by Minnesota, and Guy Lafleur, who was selected from the Quebec Nordiques by the Minnesota North Stars. Now, after the expansion draft, some of these players would get traded. Most notably, Guy Lafleur was dealt back to the Quebec Nordiques following the expansion draft for Alan Hayworth, and his retirement would come not too long afterwards, as he would retire before the 1991-92 season. And also, Dave Babich was later traded to the Vancouver Canucks by the North Stars for Tom Curvers. Check out my Curvers video, by the way. It's really cool. I'll have the link in the description. And for San Jose, essentially, they were the ones who kind of reaped most of the benefits from both of these drafts. The team at the NHL level was not very good, but that was a typical expansion team at the time. However, its IHL affiliate was very successful early on. In 1992, they won the Turner Cup, which was the IHL championship trophy, and most of those players that were a part of that championship squad were actually acquired from the Minnesota North Stars in the Dispersal Draft. For the North Stars, however, things became even more bleak. After the Gunn brothers sold the team to the consortium would basically fall apart, and they would be led by Norman Green within a year, and basically the franchise would be forced to relocate to Dallas, Texas at the conclusion of the 1992-93 season. And now we call them the Dallas Stars. And that's all I got. So that was the last dispersal draft in NHL history. It has not happened since 1991, and I don't expect it to really happen ever again for NHL's history books. And don't forget, the NHL entry draft is this Friday. We'll see how the first round goes. I might be doing a live stream for that, so keep an eye out. And yes, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this one, and I'll see you all in my next video.